Welcome to the Wholesome Healing Collective.
Join us on our podcast for a journey into the hearts of healers from all walks of life, diving deep as we explore meaningful conversations that have the power to inspire, empower, and share life-changing wisdom.
Through this community, we hope to create a welcoming environment where our listeners leave feeling nurtured and uplifted. We are so delighted you are here. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Renee. Grab a drink, get cozy, and let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Wholesome Healing Collective podcast. We are so happy to have our guest today, Sara Beth Wald. She is a former social worker and journalist and turned into blogger, author, and the founder of Redefining Love. And we're so honored to have you on today, Sara, to kick us off.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you our signature question. What is your favorite self-care practice?
So, especially this time of year, I have to go on a walk. I really kind of have to go on a walk. And it's not that I do every day, but my family notices a difference. I notice a difference. So, I go for marathon walks. They're really long. My family doesn't typically go with me, or I will circle back past my house, deposit my family member, and then keep walking. So I'll go 3 to 5 miles sometimes, just because I do my best thinking on my walks. And it's been rainy here, and it's been very hard on me and my family that I haven't been able to walk as much as I usually do. So yes, my walks.
Yeah, I love that. 5 miles. That's so crazy.
I don't do that every day, but that would be ideal. Every day I would if I could. But even just a mile or two is just what I need to get recentered.
Yeah, that time in nature, that kind of meditative state while you're walking and letting those thoughts float by. I love that.
Yes, it's wonderful. I love it too. This is a great time of year usually when it's not raining. Sometimes I even walk in the rain.
I feel that this time of year as well. There's always this transition between winter and spring where I go from really like quiet, cozied up mornings where I'm, maybe meditating in front of the fire or just sipping tea to that switch of like, okay, now my body wants to move. I want to process while I'm moving, meditate while I'm moving, and I love walking.
Yes. When I can't walk in the winter time, I do yoga and I stretch and I breathe, and it's okay, but there's nothing like a walk for me.
Yeah. So I'd love to chat about your book, Redefining Love. You just came out with this a month ago or so?
In April, yes.
April. Okay. Yeah, it's been such a great book. I'm having a mini book club with my mom. I feel like it was a great way to open the door to have some of these hard conversations with someone you love that you maybe weren't taking along with you on your healing journey.
Hi, I'm so excited to hear you're doing that. And I would be very interested in your feedback after, and if it was helpful and what kind of discussions it generated. And it's courageous to take that journey with someone that you're working on setting boundaries with is really exciting to me, and I hope it's helpful. Yeah. So the book is based on the premise that the current definition of love that we operate under doesn't work for us. It doesn't serve us. Because love is portrayed in media and in our families and in our culture and all of our relationships as this warm, fuzzy thing. And the truth of it is that it isn't always warm and fuzzy. And that's what I discovered in my own trauma journey. And then the journalist in me just kind of started asking questions of people in my life and people around me. And I kind of realized that, yeah, if love is always warm and fuzzy, then if we're not feeling warm and fuzzy, then we're not doing love right. And that really bothered me. And I thought there has to be a way. And then there was this dichotomy between love and hate. Then it was like these two extremes. And I thought there has to be a different way of doing this love thing, so that we can leave room for ourselves and space for our own big feelings and our own mental health, while still loving the other person through that. And ultimately, the conclusion was that we needed to be able to love people from a distance.
Yeah.
And that distance is going to be different for everyone. And I just, it opened up a whole new way of doing life for me. And I ended up blogging about it. And it's built on this foundation of boundaries, accountability, and grace. Those are the three pillars. And it was kind of life-changing for me. And then the blog started taking off, and it has grown organically. And now I'm doing this full time.
Yay. Yeah, boundaries, accountability, and grace. And you have to have all three of those together to make it work.
Right. Yep. You have to find a balance between those three. And so the book outlines how to do that and how to integrate those things into your life and what that looks like. And it's really based on that blog that I started in 2018, and didn't intend it to become a book, but yeah, it's taken on a mind of its own.
Yeah, I love that.
The first thing that came to mind as you were speaking about that is, and maybe this is just kind of different words, but what was coming to mind was that transition as you incorporate those pillars, transitioning from the conditional love to the unconditional love, and how we're so often grown and socialized to think that in order to receive love, we have to do XYZ, probably from whatever we felt like we needed to do or perform for our parents to get that recognition, that love, that care. And then it turns into our love language of, oh, I need to perform or I need to do these things. And I just love those three pillars put together, because that really does summarize what we really need to embrace to make that transition. Because I know for myself, there's been a lot of guilt when I try to set boundaries, especially with family, because the reality is as much as I want relationships to look a certain way, sometimes it does have to be from a distance. And that doesn't mean that I don't love them. And it doesn't mean that maybe that might change in time with more grace and accountability to those boundaries. But I felt like a little twinge of guilt lift when I heard you speaking of that, it's okay to permission ourselves to love from afar, and to not diminish that love just because there is distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really had to settle into the idea that I had a similar thing with the guilt. And I think a lot of us do. And that again is based on that definition of love, that it's sort of this transactional thing. Like, I have to give you something, you give me something. And when that transaction isn't working, there's resentment on both sides, there's guilt on both sides, and it creates this shame cycle. You're sort of just passing that back and forth to each other. And one of the things that I really think is important for people to recognize is that boundaries aren't actually mean. The way that I define boundaries is that you're creating space for yourself. And there's an act of love in setting those boundaries, because you're expressing the space that you take up in the world. You're saying, I love you and I trust you enough to show my whole self to you. And this is part of myself, and myself needs this space. And when you do that, you're giving someone a gift, because we don't share that with everyone. We don't, if you're going to put in the effort in the relationship to have that conversation, which might feel uncomfortable, it's because you value that person enough to put the effort in. We don't sit down and have those conversations with just anybody. So I love to reframe that whole idea of boundaries and what it means to set boundaries. It's really just establishing where you end and someone else begins, and loving yourself enough to allow yourself to have that space, because a lot of times we kind of hold that close and sacrifice our own needs to make sure the other person is comfortable. And that's really unfair to both of you. It's unfair to yourself, but it's also unfair to the other person, because you're not sharing your whole feelings and your whole self. And so I've really worked to reframe that.
Yeah. I'd love to double click into that conversation part of it, because I feel like that's so crucial. And I hear oftentimes, I'm thinking of a particular friend who talks about these boundaries that she's set, but she hasn't actually communicated those boundaries to the other person. She's just, in my mind, that's more of like a wall. I put up this wall and I won't let you cross it, but I'm not going to communicate that line to you. And I feel like that is a missing link oftentimes, and something that creates resistance on both sides, because you might have this boundary that you've set in your mind, but when it's not communicated, there's this like unsettling resistance that is just there, that makes it icky feeling, when it should feel spacious and nourishing to you to have that space.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I like that. Spacious and nourishing. That's really good. I'm writing it down. Because that's just so beautiful. Yeah, so one of the things that it relates to is the idea of conflict, which is a huge part of what I help people work through, because we also kind of have to redefine conflict. We think of conflict as this really, really scary, bad thing to be avoided at all costs. And I understand why, especially if the other person, I mean, like Alyssa was talking about doing this mini book club with her mom, and it's so beautiful, because a lot of times we are having to set boundaries with people who are not at all receptive to having that conversation and joining us on that journey. So so there's a couple things there. One is to give yourself grace if you're not ready to have that conversation, because depending on the dynamic with the person, there's all kinds of reasons we don't have the conversation. And so sometimes people do end up just setting an internal boundary. And the key for it, though, and two of the big things that I'm a huge proponent of, is intention and curiosity. So it really, have you been intentional about that? Have you been curious about that? Why aren't you talking to the person? Is it because it's just uncomfortable and you just really don't want to step into that? And is it something you can challenge yourself on? Or is it because it's unsafe on the receiving end? So, and unsafe doesn't necessarily mean physically unsafe, although obviously that could be an issue for some people in some situations. But maybe just really emotionally unsafe, where this person is a proven record of toxicity, and you already know that, and part of that boundary might be, I'm just not going to put myself in that position to have that conversation. But until you get intentional and until you get curious, you don't really know the why behind it. And I think the why is really, really important. So that intention and curiosity is great. That grace for yourself is really important. And then finally, if you decide, yep, I really need to have this conversation, managing expectations around it. So a lot of times we go into these, and I've done it myself. Oh my gosh, so many times. You go into these hard conversations with this expectation the other person is going to be like at the edge of their seat, so grateful that you're talking to them, and that they're going to be receptive, and that this is going to cause great changes in your relationship. And then if that doesn't happen, it's hugely disappointing. And so I often with people, I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, so what's your expectation as you go into this conversation? And we really examine it again with intention and curiosity, so that we can, when you go into it, you can't control how the other person is going to respond. You can only control your own actions and your own words. And I also am a big believer in scripts. Write it out word for word, what you want to say, and then stick to your message. Because depending on the person, if it's somebody who's been really, really toxic, and if they're a manipulative person, they're going to try to dance circles around you. And that's probably a dynamic you've had for a long time. So if you're not prepared, you're going to just slip back into those old patterns again. And then the final thing is to give yourself grace if you do slip into those old patterns, because it's not an overnight. You don't read the book and then one day wake up and all of a sudden you can set all the boundaries. And it's a process, and it takes, like anything, it takes practice. So if it doesn't work out, do the breath. Breathing before you go into it is so good too. And throughout, you remind yourself to breathe, which you two are so good at teaching people how to do, because that can help you stay centered and remember why you're there and remember the intention behind it and all the things. But lots of grace for yourself through the whole process. Yeah.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about accountability. We talked about boundaries, a little bit about grace, but what does accountability mean in the Redefining Love framework?
So accountability is kind of a scary word. It tends to be the pillar that people get the most nervous about, I think, as we step into it. And so I really, again, it has to be balanced with that grace. So I approach accountability with as much grace as I can, reminding people that it isn't a perfect process. It isn't a pass fail kind of situation. And then we gently step into examining again. It's that intention and curiosity at every stage, and examining the part that we play in the dysfunction dance, in the shame cycle, because until we can acknowledge that, we can't fix it. It's just like identifying a problem that any problem that you have, if you don't identify it, you can't solve the problem. And there's always two sides to a story. We all have lightness and dark in us, and that can be really tricky in terms of victim blaming. So we don't want to step into this place with accountability where it's all your fault. It can be really, in an abuse situation, really important to clarify that it is never your fault. And no amount of boundaries, no amount of accountability is going to solve an abuse situation. So if there is like a physical safety issue, the only answer is to step away from the relationship. And so then we work on that. But the accountability comes in even in those kinds of situations, insofar as we don't want you to replace one toxic, dangerous relationship with another. So let's explore what in yourself is taking you down this road in these relationships. And it always has to do with self-love and a feeling of worth. And if you can recognize that you deserve better, then the next time you can set a healthier expectations and boundaries in your relationship, and hopefully be attracted to and attract to yourself more healthy relationships. So So yeah, that's accountability. We do a lot of introspection. And then of course, accountability also goes the other way towards the other person. So how do we hold people accountable who aren't really interested in taking responsibility for their own parts in the toxic cycle? And that can feel really, really scary as well. Particularly, I found it in parent-child relationships, because we go immediately back into that child's mind of, I'm supposed to be this to be a good girl or a good boy. And so tapping into that wounded child, we do a lot of wounded child work to explore those different pieces of yourself that might be taking you into these relationships and keeping you from really acknowledging just how toxic people's treatment of you is. So accountability it's uncomfortable, but it's also really liberating. When the light bulb turns on above, it's just really exciting to see.
Yeah, I love that it goes both ways, like holding
Yeah.
yourself accountable and holding the other people accountable.
Yeah. And we really can't, that's where the whole cycle, we really can't set boundaries until we've really established what's yours and what's mine, right? So that's the accountability process, is really recognizing this just isn't mine to carry, or this is mine to carry, and I've been kind of putting it on somebody else. My happiness is mine to carry. It's not your responsibility to make me happy and fill my cup. So it involves that whole balancing between the boundaries, the accountability, and the grace.
I love that.
I was reading in one of your blog posts about self-love, talking about accountability and the accountability of yourself, maybe not necessarily when you're in a process or you're in a situation that you want to change, but you're wanting to have that accountability of self-love as a maintenance and as a tune-up. And you talked about engaging the people, your support people, as part of your own accountability, like having a therapist. And I liked how you talked about exploring situations that maybe aren't actively present or actively bringing you heartache, but bringing that curiosity and intention of, okay, well, why did I do that when I was 20? Why did I enter that relationship? And what's there for me to learn and explore, even if it's not like, oh, I'm in this cycle again, and why am I doing this? But just that next step of, I think sometimes we might get out of a cycle or we get out of a behavior or relationship, and then it's like, okay, my work's done, or we go back to our normal day-to-day conditioning or lives. And it's so important for that continued self-growth to be curious about those previous scenarios and engaging that help to say, hey, I want to explore this, and not just this one time, but I'm going to schedule another appointment and another appointment, and please hold me accountable to continuing that exploration. So I'm curious if maybe you could talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah. And that is when, for me, redefining love gets really exciting, is when it starts to just become a lifestyle, and you learned how to apply the thinking almost as a habit, and being curious every time, like, because that's all of us. Life is a journey, right? And hopefully we never stop learning about ourselves and learning about the world. And so let's say, for example, my husband and I just get in a little snippy argument, like we all do with our spouses sometimes, even in the healthiest relationships. We all have stuff to work on. And so getting into the habit of just doing that exploration is really exciting, because that's when it really starts to show up in all of your the new people that are coming into your life, and the people that you're bringing and attracting into your life. It changes, and it's really fun to see. And that's really where the freedom comes for me in my own life. And then I see it in other people as they start to apply the principles. But as far as maintenance and mental health, I am always, and I'll say it over and over again, a huge proponent of therapy, or of what you guys are doing, breath work, just all of the introspective healing modalities shouldn't just be done when we're in crisis. We shouldn't wait until we're in crisis to get the help and support we need. And what I always say is we should have a therapist the same way we have a dentist, the same way we have a doctor, where we go for a physical once a year and just kind of check in on that and get a checkup, so to speak, and make sure that everything is in the right place, and that you're headed in a direction that's healthy, because life is not just it's not just a once and done thing. It's very up and down for all of us. No matter who you are and where you're at in your journey, you're still going to have good days and not so good days. And it's valuable to have that support system in place. Another way we can do that is to surround ourselves with people who will hold us accountable. And you know what? I notice in my own life that my friendships just evolved and grew as I went through this process for myself. And I made a lot of new, really close connections, but I really became hungry for people who were going to be real and call me on it and be like, that was weird. I don't know where you were coming from with that. And that was out of line, that kind of thing. My friends tend to be the gentler approach, where it's like, maybe that's something you want to examine further. There's lots of different ways that you can hold people accountable depending on the dynamic of your relationship. But I really encourage people to spend time with people who are going to celebrate their successes with them, and also hold them accountable when you maybe start to veer off track. So yeah, that's the maintenance part is huge. It's a huge part of redefining love.
Yeah, so important. I definitely recognize that tendency in myself and with clients that I work with, particularly in breath work, where they wait till there's dysregulation to then come back to the breath or to call on a friend. And while that is so important to have those tools when you are dysregulated, we can do so much benefit for ourselves when we do that maintenance, to set ourselves up for success and to give ourselves a bigger bandwidth to handle the stress as it comes, so that we don't get dysregulated so easily.
Yeah, and it really is just integrating it until it becomes a habit, and it's so beautiful. But we all do it, don't we? We all, I still do it. Everyone I know still does it. Sometimes we do. We push and we push and we push, and life gets busy, and all of a sudden all hell's broken loose. And so I also want to make sure we give grace for that, because it is just a part of life to a certain extent. But to create those habits of being able to maintain your regulation throughout whatever life throws at you is so valuable. Absolutely.
Okay, so you're going to be on a TED Talks in October. Are you excited for that?
I am excited. Yeah, I am excited, which is a huge deal for me to be excited for something like that, because I am historically such an introvert, and I still am an introvert, but I've really learned to lean into this whole sharing my story thing. And it's been really beautiful and exciting for me to recognize that I have this other side of myself. I have always been a keyboard warrior. I love hiding behind my computer and writing. I am a writer first and foremost, but yeah, finding my voice to the point where I'm actually excited to do a public speaking event at this caliber is a pretty big deal and has been a journey for me. So yeah, super excited about that. I'm working on the outline this week. The first draft of the outline is due this Friday. So I'm getting close to having my first draft done, and they do a really great job of working with you and helping you craft a talk that will be effective and helpful to people, and represent the TEDx brand the way that they the quality of presentation that they hope for. And so yeah, it's been a really, really great experience, and I'm super excited.
That's so cool. I can't wait to go to that.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be a really great day. There's a really cool lineup of people. So yeah, it's an honor to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned you're, that introvert and you prefer to be behind the screen, but you're excited to step out and share your voice, share your story, your message. So beautiful.
Yeah, and it helps to have passion. I'm so passionate about the idea of redefining love, and I really am kind of I have a sense of mission to help people redefine the way that they approach love and conflict and forgiveness, what all of those things look like, and how we can hopefully, if we all just work, I really believe that if we all just do what we can in our own relationships, there will be this ripple effect that will hopefully start to affect change culturally, and we don't have to feel so divided, and we allow space for people to be where they're at, which is a huge part of redefining love, is letting people have their own journey, which sometimes involves culturally, it involves letting people vote for other people and loving people through some really hard conversations and disagreements culturally. And so the big picture of redefining love is that eventually we would all come to a place where we just give each other a lot more grace. And that involves recognizing that everybody's going to have their own journey and their own path.
Fellow introvert, I'm very inspired by that courageousness and that passion that's moving you forward. I feel like there's part of me that waits for that moment where I get that spur that will ignite more of a outspoken side of me when it comes to those things. So I just love hearing that and feeling the possibility for us fellow introverts that that can move through us.
Yep. And I really think that it comes from a place of passion. And if you really find what lights you up, that's huge. And it sort of overrides that urge to stay small and stay hidden. And then the other part of it is to recognize, really own the fact that people are interested in what you have to say, which is a hard thing to accept if you're not used to that. And I admit there are still many moments in my life right now where I'm sort of scratching my head, like, they really want to hear me talk about this, but and that's where just doing it over and over helps. But also just recognizing, like, you know what, I do have value and my voice does matter. And it really, that big old dose of grace that you give yourself helps too, because it sort of gets past that perfectionism of, if I don't have my message perfect and I don't articulate myself as clearly as Oprah, say, or, it's like we compare ourselves to these huge figures that have been doing it for a lifetime and all the things. And really what I've come to realize is that people appreciate authenticity, and they appreciate when people just show their true heart, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And that was a big one for me to accept, is that I don't have to have, not every conversation has to be a TEDx talk. And that's, we look at TEDx and it's like, well, actually, I don't speak till October, and my first draft is due this June 23rd. So, that's a lot of practice, and you have like professional people helping you practice, and it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. It can be a goal to shoot for, but to just start where you're at is a really beautiful thing and is life-changing for other people.
Yeah. And I love how the sensations in the body of excitement and anxiety are like the same. And so you can kind of shift your mindset on, I'm not anxious right now, I'm just excited for what I'm about to do. And dancing with that comfort zone line and stepping outside of it for a little while helps to expand that window of tolerance, making these things feel safer in the body every time you do them.
Yes. Yeah. Always love the term window of tolerance. Yeah. And I think that's another really great point that you brought up, is that it's okay to be uncomfortable. We're working on that with our 10-year-old, who is very much a perfectionist, and he goes up and to baseball, and he's so nervous, and he doesn't even swing because he's so afraid of missing the ball. And that discomfort, and just getting comfortable with the idea that I might screw this up, and that's okay. So yeah, that's a great point to bring up.
Are there any highlights from the books, nuggets of wisdom that you feel compelled to share with us and our audience?
Gosh, we've shared so much about it. Yeah, I think I would close out with just a real quick conversation on forgiveness, because it's such a big thing. It's a buzzword right now. And I think that we need to redefine forgiveness as well. And right now, I think a lot of people, we go into forgiveness with this cultural idea of forgive and forget, or if you aren't in relationship with a person, you must be carrying all of this rage and anger, and you must not have found forgiveness yet. And it's one of the harder concepts to wrap your brain around in redefining love. But it's like, okay, so if I'm going to love this person from a distance, but they want a relationship with me, then I must not be forgiving them. And my thought on that is there's a huge difference between forgiveness and trust, and we need to distinguish between those two. Trust is, I feel comfortable and safe with you enough to share time and energy at this deeper level with you. Forgiveness is, I recognize that you were reacting from a place of your own trauma, your own experiences, and I give you grace for that, but you don't necessarily have to then go into a trusting relationship with them again. They're separate. There's a delineation between the two. And I think that we really can't learn to love people from a distance until we wrap our brain around that whole idea of forgiveness and trust being two separate things. And yes, forgiveness is healing. Yes, it's hard to move forward in life if you're carrying bitterness and anger and resentment, but you can release those and not go back into a relationship with that person. Forgiveness doesn't have to be a relational experience. Trust is a relational experience. So those are two different things.
That is such a valuable point to make. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that reframe.
How might that apply when we're going through the process of forgiving ourselves and wanting to rebuild that trust with ourselves. Because I suspect and I see in myself that as I release things that I'm letting go of and forgiving myself, I think there is this expectation that I'll all of a sudden trust myself in that area, or expect that trust is just there on its own. And I bet that there's some steps that we can take to start to foster that trust and rebuild it.
What a great question. Yeah. And so it all comes back to grace again. And what I talk to my clients about is, how long did it take you to dig yourself into this hole? And it isn't fair. You wouldn't expect your friend to suddenly have this huge shift. So it involves making friends with ourselves again, and really recognizing, or maybe for the first time, some of us, recognizing that it isn't an overnight process, and giving yourself tons of grace to practice. And that's where the whole cycle comes of boundaries, accountability, and grace, where what happens when we can't forgive ourselves is we're sort of stuck in accountability mode, where it's like, oh, stupid. And, I used to actually have this urge to bang my head against a wall and say stupid. And I finally had to realize, okay, so I'm stuck in accountability. Let's step into grace. Let's see where boundaries fit into this. How can I set some boundaries around the thoughts that I'm applying to myself? And then also doing a lot of wounded child work, because it's easy to beat up adult Renee, adult Alyssa, adult Sara. We can take it, right? Like we're picking on someone our own size. But when you recognize that you are acting from a place of wounded within yourself, of a child. And I actually still have it right next to me here. It's a little dusty, a picture of myself, little Sara. And I keep it there all the time. Because it's easier, it's harder to abuse that little Sara, and it's easier to forgive that little Sara. And so we do a lot of parts work in identifying what wounded part of your younger self was acting in this situation. And it's easier to be gentle with our younger selves.
Yeah. And I bet each time when you notice the shift, or notice where you held your boundaries, or when you cared for yourself in the way that we desire to, that helps to build that trust along the way, taking that time to pause and reflect.
Yep. It all goes back. That's a great way to round out our conversation, because it all goes back to that intention and curiosity. It's at the core of everything. All the boundaries, all the accountability, all the grace always comes back to intention and curiosity.
Yes. So where can our listeners find you, Sara? You've got a website, you're on Facebook, anywhere else?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. So for more information on Redefining Love, they can go to redefine-love.com. You can also find me at sarabethwald.com. So I have a couple websites, and I'm on Facebook, Sara Beth Wald. I'm on Instagram at Love Redefine. So yeah, I'm all over the place. They can find me in any of those places.
Yeah. And you're starting a podcast soon.
I am starting a podcast soon. Yes. We're still recording episodes, so it's not out yet, but it's a collaboration with my friend Rachel, and we're calling it Two Moms in Montana, and we're going to talk about all sorts of fun stuff. So yeah.
I love that.
And the book Redefining Love is also available on Amazon, so you can find it there too.
Beautiful. We are so honored to have you on today, and I hope that our listeners have a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.